Hey there, my name is Matthew Wang, and I'm very excited today to be here on behalf of SonicScoop.com and the good people at Arturia to show you Pigments 3. So what is Pigments 3? Pigments 3 is a state-of-the-art software instrument that gives you a lot of different kinds of synthesis that you can play with. We have everything from analog synthesis to wavetable synthesis. We even have a sampler, as well as the brand new harmonic engine. On top of that, there's an incredible preset browser here where we can kind of navigate sounds from basses to pads, string ensembles, leads, and way more. You can like your favorite presets to recall them faster next time. And you can also go to the store here and purchase additional preset banks from Arturia if you ever feel like you need to find some more inspiration. While it's incredibly easy to find a sound, you can also modify existing presets and make your own because we have a lot of incredible modulation sources here and utilities to really craft the sound. And it's incredibly easy to also just add a little movement by just clicking a modulation source and clicking a knob you want to modulate and just seeing everything happen really quickly. To top it off, we also have an effects section here where we can navigate between filter and EQ effects, dynamic effects, distortion effects, time-based kind of delays and reverbs, and modulation effects. And some of these effects are also based off of the effects modeled from other hardware synthesizers that Arturia has previously modeled, namely for the V collection. Finally, we have a sequencer section here, which actually also contains an arpeggiator, and it's a great area to just kind of add some more movement, both rhythmic and melodic, to a preset or to a sound that you created. Without further ado, let's kind of dive into some of the more in-depth features as well. So first off, let's go and look at just the default preset, Ring My Bell. Sounds cool. Now, we can see in the top left, we have this engine 1. So right next to it, engine 2. If we start with engine 1, though, basically the engine is the thing that creates the sound, right? It's our noise source, or noise generator, in a way. We can click here and switch between analog, wavetable, sample, and the cool thing here is you can actually add your own samples. But let's go to Music Box. Or harmonic. So harmonic is interesting. It's one of the new additions to Pigments 3. It has, the qualities of an FM synth or an additive synthesizer, where instead of starting off with a lot of complex waveforms and then subtracting it using filters, with additive synthesis, you're actually making a sound and then you're adding more harmonics and adding more interest in a way to it. So the way we do that here is there's a knob called partials, and we can introduce more or less partials. So if I play a chord here with the partial set down, and there is some modulation happening on it, but let's just start down. And then if we raise this all the way up, becomes a lot brighter and we hear just more information. So we can even go, instead of 128 partials as our limit, we can set it up to 512. So on the lowest side, it's probably going to sound more like a sine wave. And as we raise it up, it will probably sound more like a saw wave. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar in the sense of brightness. So that's one way if we have a sound with the harmonic engine to just introduce a little more crispiness or, harmonic content to the sound. Another way we can do that with this sound, there's a multiband compressor, and we can see it's actually on by default in this preset, Ring My Bell. We can introduce even more harmonic content using a multiband compressor by, just in this case, if I want to take the out high and just raise that up a tad, we'll get even more brightness and more high end. Pretty shrill now. There's a great preset too that a lot of producers might recognize called OPP in here. And if I hit that, yeah, and just a little more brightness, a little more harmonic content. That's just a way to make your sounds kind of stand out a little more. Let's go check out some of these other presets in here too. I'm just going to kind of go around the preset browser, see what we have. That's cool. Cool. here's a nice kind of subdued pad sound. So one thing I want to show off with this, you know, sometimes we're going through presets and we're just looking for something, but this pad sound isn't just a pad sound, because in Pigments, we have access to these macros here that a lot of the people who program these presets for Pigments, they spend a lot of time on. So M1, M2, M3, M4, these are all macro knobs, and if we adjust them, we'll see that they actually do quite a bit to the sound. So here's just me playing a C power chord and moving the knob. That's pulse. Now it's a pulse sound. Pretty cool. Let's see what happens if I raise the noisy knob, which says it will be great for dramatic effect. Really cool. And if I take down the reverb macro, less reverb. So these macros are really cool, and it's something I want to touch on because, again, sometimes we're looking for a specific kind of sound, and we just mouse through presets, and if it's not the right thing, we just hit next, next, next. But sometimes you can just open up a preset, even if it doesn't sound right for what you're intending, go into the macros, just wiggle some of these knobs a little bit. Sometimes these are just great ways to, you know, bring more life to one sound. And sometimes, you know, in this case, maybe I'm working on a soundtrack for something and it needs to have a dark soundscape start with a pad. And then as more stuff happens on screen and there's more tension happening, I just slowly automate the pulse macro here up a little bit. So just to clarify as well, the pulse macro is not the same for every single preset. So if I go to the next preset here, just hit preset next, these macros change. Now it's timbre, rate, variant, and a stereo macro. So macros, and in fact, I can even show you how to program one real quick. Let's go to a sound like emotional piano. So there's already some macros assigned here, and that's okay. I'm just going to click here. That kind of allows us to set our macro parameters, and we can click on these little tabs to adjust each modulation source. So for macro 1, now I've unassigned it so it's not doing anything. So let's say I just want macro 1 to introduce an effect. So for effects A, let's set it to the level of the overdrive. I'm going to set the overdrive all the way down, hit this little plus, raise this here for the amount of overdrive we can add via the macro. And I also need to rename macro 1. It still says timbre. So if I double click down here for macro 1, it's just going to be called overdrive amount now, or I'll call it OD amount, so we can see the whole thing. Cool. And look at that, overdrive amount. Now if I play the sound and raise this, you'll see it actually raises the level for the overdrive. So we can see that I just quickly programmed a macro. But the great thing with macros is it doesn't just have to be the overdrive amount. Because if it was just that, I could easily go in and tweak that right here. In the DAW, I could just say, okay, that's overdrive level. But with macros, we can actually assign multiple parameters to one macro knob. So let's go into the synth aspect. And let's say, okay, we have a sample here. That's, I assume, something similar to a piano. Now let's just add a little more brightness, a little more of like a clicky kind of sound to it. And I'm just going to introduce engine 2 here. We're going to go to the harmonic engine. As I mentioned, it's great for adding some brightness, especially if we have our partials up a bit. So I'm going to take off engine 1 for a sec. I just want to make a really cool sound in engine 2. Kind of cool. I just want to make sure the envelopes for it are pretty set. So what I'm going to do is set envelope 3, which is unused, to the volume. So to do this, just click here and drag. Great. It's a really short envelope right now. So I'm just going to make sure to set the decay a little longer. Tack down, going for clicky. Sustain down, release a little bit. Decay curve. We can adjust the curve of the decay. You can kind of hear what that does. And we're also going to set envelope 3 to the partials. So I'm actually going to take the partials down, plucky, and then just here. Basically what it does is as the envelope's at its top, we have more partials, and then as the sound decays, we lose the partials. So it's a lot of harmonics quickly going to less. And the volume drops too, because we have the envelope 3 assigned to both the partials volume and the amount of partials that we have. Just want a little bit of that. And now we put engine 1 back in. We have some more harmonics. But what I'm going to do is make this controllable by the macros. So here we have macro 1 knob. I click here, and I go to the volume, the output for the harmonic engine. I'll set this up so it can go as far as that high. Now, if I leave it, I'm going to also rename it. Instead of overdrive, I'll just call it harmonics. And now if I move this knob, it's moving that distortion that we programmed earlier, and it's also introducing more harmonic content. So that's why I love the macros, because you can have one macro knob do multiple things. In this case, it's adding a little more overdrive, and if we click up here, we can see all the things it's affecting. Effects 1, modulation 3. A little annoying it doesn't say what that is, but we can just quickly click over here to the effects tab and see, okay, overdrive. Effects 1, mod 3, so level, nice. And then engine 2 volume, synth, engine 2, harmonic. Okay, so we're adding a little more harmonic synthesis, a little more, in this case, just brightness, and a little more drive from the overdrive section, all from one knob. And we could take all that down right there. So these macros are really powerful, and I encourage you to check them out with all the presets. And it's also interesting to kind of just go through some of the stock Arturia presets. And I can just click on M1 and see what timbre actually is affecting. And in this case, I can see it's affecting the amount of filter mix, sidechain something, filter 1 cutoff, resonance, and the volume of one of the engines. And if we move the knob and go into the synth section, we can actually see that happening. And I'm realizing that it might be a little hard to notice, so I'm just going to zoom in a little, and you'll see there's a little white dot that kind of moves as I move the timbre. And you can see it on the filter pretty clearly. So look at the filter cutoff as I move the timbre. So that's how you can kind of see what these macros are doing. Lastly, I just kind of want to show how I would program a sound from scratch using some of the great new features in Pigments 3. So by default, I really recommend opening up template and then going down to where it says default. Horribly boring sound. Sine wave, but what's a better building block than a sine wave for synthesis? I think right now I'm feeling kind of like an ethereal pad sound, and maybe we can turn it into a pulse too, kind of like that first preset we took a dive into. So I'm going to use the wavetable here. I'm going to introduce some more harmonics by just finding, and if I search it to 2D, we can see it's kind of a squarey sound, not saw-like. Something in between. Got some brightness to it. And then let's use one of the Jupiter filters, which is new to Pigments 3. And if we use the low pass 12 dB per octave, it's just a little slightly tamer adjustment to the sound. I want to introduce LFO movement into the cutoff knob, so it just gets a little more interesting. We can do it the way I have been, where I hit LFO 1 and then move the knob. I'll show you the other way to do modulation in Pigments 3, which is I can go to cutoff or whatever knob I want, hit the little plus sign next to it, and then just move LFO 1. And now there's a nice little bit of LFO movement. From there, if I click on LFO 1, I can adjust the speed. And I just want to move the knob down a little bit more. And it seems like there's a little too much modulation on there, so I'm going to take it down just a hair. Nice. And then let's go to the effects. You know, this is still not a great pad sound, but I want to try to make it really usable and really great really quickly. So to do so, I'm going to go to delay, PS delay, pitch shift delay. It's kind of like a granular delay in a way. Here's the C major. Great delay sound. If I raise the pitch shift up 12 semitones to 1 octave, really cool. It dies a little quickly, so I'm going to raise the feedback. I like it stereo offset a little bit of spray time. And then let's set the reverb 100% wet. It'll cover up all those little imperfections in the delay that we're hearing where it's like stuttering a bit, where it's like do, do, do. And now if I have it 100% wet, it's a very usable, ethereal pad sound. I really like it. Yeah, that's kind of like a little look at how to navigate the Pigments interface. The last thing I want to talk about is how to make that pulsy kind of sound that we heard in the first preset. And we're going to do that with a macro. So I'm going to add a filter over here. I'm going to add a multi-filter, I guess. Let's go, yeah, that should work. Low pass 24 dB per octave. And if I use the function here, which is similar to an LFO, oh, whoops, need to adjust the ring up here. And if I click on functions, now I can actually program in, if I click here in the draw mode to select these kind of little steps like this, you can see the filter kind of moving. It's a little too fast, right down here. And to introduce that with a macro, if I set the M1 to cut off filter here, or actually better yet, to dry, and take the dry all the way down, then we can say that this is sequence. So as I raise this all the way up, there's no sequence to it. And if I have it down, now there's this kind of side-chained filter thing to go into it. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this quick look at Pigments 3 by Arturia. It's an incredibly modern, powerful synthesizer that has so much amazing sound sculpting possibility just with all these modulation sources. And I love that they're all laid out right in the middle of the synth, even if you're navigating between the different kinds of pages here. It's also kind of cool that even though it's a modern synth, I mean, you have old school kind of analog synthesis here, as well as, you know, more old school effects like the chorus June 6 here, based off one of my favorite hardware synths of all time. And it's a nice way to have new sounds where you just add a bit of like an old school life to it and a bit of vintage flavor. And vice versa, if you have a sound in the preset browser, for instance, that maybe sounds like a 70s disco line, you can actually add some more life to it with modulation sources here that might not even be available in the actual hardware vintage synth that sound is based off of. I really enjoyed working with this synth, and I hope you might try out the free trial to see if it could do wonders for your own workflow. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to follow Arturia on all the socials, sonicscoop.com as well. And it's been great. I've been Matthew Wang. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and have a good one.